So, perhaps you've heard that Amazon and the Tolkien estate are getting sued for copying elements from this author, Demetrious Polychron, that have written The Fellowship of the King. Yes, a very original title. And boy oh boy, are we in for a treat. He can't even get Tolkien's name right. Now, this is a fan fiction book that continues Tolkien's story into the Fourth Age, and apparently there's some flashbacks to the Second Age and likely other periods before the Fourth Age. Now, Demetrious claims that the Rings of Power have stolen some elements from his book and used in the show. For his sake, I hope not, because the show was dreadful and it could easily make him the worst writer alive, at least I know of. Anyway, I thought it would be interesting to dive into what exactly he claims they stole, as we have a long list of things allegedly used in the Rings of Power. So hopefully I can give you guys the full picture and tell the truth. Did Amazon steal his ideas or not? So we're just going to go through the list and see if there's any reason to think that they might have stolen elements from his story. Let me point out that I'm not a lawyer, so I'll not go into details if he has a chance of winning or not, though I highly doubt it. I've not read The Fellowship of the King fully, only the first chapter, and a couple of summaries and descriptions I could find. To me it sounds very amateurish and quite cringe at times. Not to mention the countless lore contradictions added just to the description of the first book out of 6. The first chapter is copying Bilbo's farewell party, but is instead with Eleanor, Sam's daughter, as the protagonist. The blue wizard Alatar shows up with a letter from King Elessar. I couldn't really handle more after that. Even the titles of the chapters, just the same from The Lord of the Rings, changed slightly. Now when you sell your book on Amazon, it's probably a pretty bad idea to sue Amazon. So of course it got taken down, but at least we could enjoy the madness for a couple of days. Demetrious Polychron, co-author of The Lord of the Rings. Very impressive, especially when we consider that he wasn't even born yet when it was published. But I guess Demetrious is a wizard. Anyway, let's dive into it and go through the list, cause this is going to be crazy. So right from the start, the author claims that the cover of his book is used in the Rings of Power. Dragon destroys a great eagle in flames. Now, let's go into technicalities. That right there is a fellbeast and not a dragon. On top of that, I'd like to point out it is not really a unique idea in any way. Just think about the War of Wrath with Rondor, the Great Eagles, and all the dragons of Angband. You don't need a lot of imagination to picture an eagle going up in flames while fighting a dragon. So, not really a great start, but let's see if there's more. Galadriel becomes a warrior, takes up Finrod's sword. Now, a lot of people defending the show claim Galadriel was a warrior, based on 3 lines in particular. 1, where she's described as Amazonian and athletic. The second, being how she looked upon the dwarves as a commander. And lastly, how she fought at the kinslaying of Alcolonde. Not a lot to work with, especially when we consider the fact she was forced to act during the kinslaying. The almost comical thing is that when the war between Sauron and the elves broke out, the dwarves came out of Khazad-dûm and helped. With them came also Galadhrim warriors. So did she lead them? No, Amroth did, the son of Amdir, king of Lorien at the time. Though it had a different name, but let's not go into that. Amroth was in fact the son of Galadriel and Celeborn in the early versions of the story, which you can also read in the Unfinished Tales. Now, did Celeborn fight? Yes. Unlike Galadriel, he refused to go through Khazad-dûm and instead remained in Eregion, and he even fought off the scouts of Sauron's army when they approached Eregion. But Galadriel, well, she didn't fight. Now, of course, that doesn't mean she can't fight, but there's little evidence to support her in such a role. During the War of the Ring, the Galadhrim attacked Dol Guldur, but it was Celeborn that led the army, though Galadriel was the one that used her powers to destroy Dol Guldur. Calling her warrior, though, is a bit far-fetched to me. Anyway, the author claims it's taken from this part of his book. Led her people into the thick of attacking orcs. I honestly don't think it's a unique idea in any way. As I mentioned, some people believe she was a warrior, based on the 3 lines mentioned. I don't think it's unique enough to win in a lawsuit, but let's move on. Hobbit named Marigold. Now this is the part where the author proves that he knows absolutely nothing about Tolkien. Marigold is not a unique name in any way. In fact, Sam Gamgee's younger sister is called Marigold. Person of color character named Malvia. Now this one seems a bit racist at first, but I guess it's the name he tries to point out is stolen and not the idea of featuring a black character. And yet again he proves that he knows nothing. The Hobbit in the Rings of Power is named Malva, which is actually a Hobbit name taken from the lore. Malva Headstrong was the wife of Gormodok Brandybog, and thus one of the ancestors to all the Brandybogs we know in the lore. Hobbit named Eleanor Nori Harford. Now the author claims he invented the character Eleanor, daughter of Sam Gamgee and Rosie Cotton. Wildly absurd. He is basically claiming he invented the character, while it of course features in the Lord of the Rings. I guess Demetrious lost his mind or forgot to read the books more than once. Vial of Healing, Elfin Seeds, Waters of Awakening. Another far-fetched connection between the book and the show. The Waters of Awakening is a translation of the name Cuivienen. I don't recall it being mentioned in the show, but surely it might have been. But I guess this point is still laughable, and proves why you need an actual law expert to proofread your papers before sending them, especially when you try to sue someone. Elfin Seeds, he means Alvarin Seeds, which indeed does feature in the show. I remember it because I talked about it being a setup in the first reviews. Alvarin is the Elvish name for the flower symbol Mune, which you might remember from the Lord of the Rings, as it grew on the mounts of the kings of Rohan. So not only is it far-fetched, but Demetrious misspelled the actual name of the flower. Not at all embarrassing. But at least you got Tolkien's name right, didn't you? Oh, never mind. The End of the War of Wrath. I don't get this one. Why can't Amazon feature that? It's from the lore. You don't own the lore. Tolkien came up with it, Demetrious. I think you've proven that when you don't even can get things right, like Fellbeast and Elfarin. And the last one for episode 1, Theo. Now this one made me shake my head. Before the show even aired, I made a video about the names in the Rings of Power and how they didn't fit well with Tolkien's lore. It's been a members only video for some months now, but I've actually decided to make it public again in case some of you guys want to watch it. Now in Demetrius' fanfiction, Merry has a son named Theoden. Now that makes sense if we consider the fact that Pippin actually named his son Faramir, and Merry did have a special bond to Theoden in the book. But the fact that he would be called Theo sort of proves yet again that he doesn't actually know the lore very well. You see, the root is Theod, not Theo. It means people or folk. We actually also see it in a name like Theodred or Eotheod. So sure, let's just say they stole the name Theo, but it's wrong both in your book and in the show. Congratulations. Fëanor's hammer on an elevated display. Alright. I mean, yeah, I guess that could be a point. But it's also the only valid one so far. Still not a very unique idea in my mind, but fair enough. The Old Doors of Khazad-dûm. Apparently also featured in his book. He refers to the West Gate, just so everyone knows. I hate this gate in the show. There were no early West Gate of Khazad-dûm. The real interest to Khazad-dûm was from the east, which is pointed out countless times in the lore. There's also a bit of lore about the dwarf road that led to the East Gate, which is found in the nature of Middle-earth. In fact, when you think about it, it becomes quite clear there wasn't a West Gate early on, because it was only built to trade with the elves that had settled in the region. So again, if stolen, it just proves neither side knows the lore. An elf granted access to Durin's halls. Again, not your idea, mate. Galadriel walks through Khazad-dûm in the Unfinished Tales with a number of elves. I even have Celebrimbor and Pengoloth visit the place in my own Second Age story. It's not a unique idea. Oh yeah, and Pengoloth is even mentioned to have been one of the few elves admitted into Khazad-dûm, so it even happens more than once. We see the original wonders of Khazad-dûm. Wow, really? That's what they stole? It's not even detailed in any way. Absurd is all I can say. First appearance of a female dwarf ever. Not really a unique thing either. For all we know, there could technically have been female dwarves. Among some of the dwarves we encounter in The Hobbit, it's hard to tell, as they had beards, looked like dwarf men, and even sounded much like them. It's unlikely though, as they rarely lift their halls, unless in times of need. But I guess this guy also wants to sue the Hobbit films, as countless female dwarves are shown. Even the first black female dwarf ever. Even though Sophia Weta, playing Disa, keep claiming she was the first one. Gandalf displays the power of Ulbandi's voice. Okay, so he says Gandalf, but he is just called the stranger in the show, or Meteor Man, if you've been around for some time. But who is Ulbandi? From what I can understand, Ulbandi is either a Valar or Maya in Demetrius' book, but I don't know for certain. In the actual lore, The name also appears in the early versions of the Legendarium. Back then, it was an ogress that had a son with the Melkor. Yes, the mother of Gothmog. Imagine that. Tolkien, however, quickly discarded the idea of ogresses and that Valar had children. Ulbandi is at one point also wood giants in the world, but it's a concept Tolkien never fully incorporated into the Legendarium. But to return to the point, yes, the wizard in the show also uses his voice, like a form of magic, but so does Saruman in The Lord of the Rings, though differently, so yeah, not that unique either. Gandalf displays the power of my wizard Alatar. It sounds like he claims he invented Alatar as well now. Jesus. He lifted his staff, caught in the winds. Yeah, not really a unique idea either. I guess it would take far more to work in a lawsuit like this, but at this point it's just getting more and more ridiculous. First appearance of Durin's wife. I mean, sure, there are no female dwarves in the story per se, but hardly a unique idea to imagine the king of Khazad-dûm had a wife. First appearance of dwarf children. Again, not really that unique. I would say it's debatable. In The Hobbit, we hear how Thorin and Balin fled from Erebor when Smaug attacked, and Balin was only 7 at the time, so a bit far-fetched perhaps, but so is this claim. Running towards or from something. Line from my poem. Apparently that line is featured in the show, though I don't recall it. It doesn't really sound like something from a poem, nor very original, but maybe that's because I'm not a native speaker. Anyway, this one seems more far-fetched than most of the others. And let's move on to episode 3. Adar, Glorfindel, the Dark Elf ruler of Mordor. So, it appears Glorfindel goes evil in Demetrious' book. And recreates Mordor, or something. I guess on that level it makes sense, but it really seems like the author misunderstands the Dark Elf element. Dark Elves were simply the elves that remained in the East. They weren't evil, like Dark Elves are in other fantasy settings. So Glorfindel could never have become a Dark Elf. It's as stupid as saying Pippin becoming a Gondorian because he travelled to Gondor. But yeah, I guess this is one of the better points so far. Galadriel sails to Númenor. One of the things that angered many fans early on when they heard about the show. The Lords never mentioned she went to Númenor, but she did meet with Taldarian in Tarbad, but it's unknown why or what happened after that. In Demetrius' book, they travelled to Númenor together though. I'm not sure if it's valid enough. It's at least a more unique idea than most of the others pointed out so far. Galadriel, commander of High King Gil-galad. So again, the guy misspells the name. It's Iranian, not Iranen. Anyway, the context of this is a little obscure. I guess it means Gil-galad invited her to stay in Lindon, or perhaps by Lake Nunuyil. Not unique at all. That's from the Unfinished Tales again. Well, not so much that she was invited, but that she lived with her husband Celeborn. So again, you're trying to claim the law as your own. Galadriel versus Queen Regent of Númenor in the company of a man. So this is a reference to Galadriel and Halbrand traveling to Númenor in the show. Halbrand, who is secretly Sauron, by the way. Never forget that. Never forgive it. The context is a bit more unclear in Polychron's story. I guess the context of his story refers to the earlier point where Eldarion returns with Galadriel. I don't feel this point is very strong, but perhaps it could be. Antipathy between Galadriel and Queen Regent of Númenor. So in Polychron's story, and Calimere dislikes Galadriel. Well, I guess Miriel does that in the show too, at least in the beginning. So a small connection perhaps. Queen Regent seeks Galadriel's death. Very similar to the above point. I don't feel Miriel in the show intends to kill Galadriel, but maybe that's just me that didn't get that impression. Anyway, I'd say it's just the same point as before. The Dark Lord has a successor, a corrupted elf. So as mentioned, Glorfindel becomes evil in the fanfiction. I'm not sure how or why, but Adar in the show seems more like an antagonist to Sauron rather than a successor. So it's a loose connection in my opinion, but sure, one of the better ones, but also very close to the one already mentioned. One of these two powerful women rides away across Númenor. Yeah. In the lore from the Unfinished Tales, it's mentioned that the Númenóreans would ride around on Númenor if not sailing. So it's just sticking to the lore, I guess. Hardly something you can claim copyright on. How else was she meant to transport herself? Walk, swim, fly, teleport? I mean, they tend to do that in the show, so I guess they could, but come on, mate. What will you take next? Our land? I don't recall that line from the show, but I guess it's Miriel asking Galadriel. Or maybe Pharason. Maybe one of you guys can remember. I think this is a fair connection. Not entirely an exact copy of the language, as the article claimed, but close enough, I guess. Galadriel flees to the other side of Numenor. Another far-fetched connection between the two. I'm not really sure where Galadriel goes in the show, except it's called the Hall of Lore. It's not from the lore, and our Menelaus is also totally wrong, so it's hard to tell from where to where she travels. This is no sigil, it is a map. Ah yes, thanks for reminding me of the dumbest thing from the Rings of Power. How the symbol of Sauron is a map of Mordor. Well, apparently a coat of arms is a map in Polychron's story. I guess that'd have to be stolen. That's one of the dumbest ideas I've ever heard. Now, I haven't read the entire Fellowship of the King, so I don't know the full context to this, but it sounds like one of the more plausible points. Mainly because it's so stupid, I prefer to believe only one person came up with the idea. But sadly, I think I'm wrong. After I lost Rose, mother of Eleanor. Oh my. Mate, they're not stealing this from you, but from the law, just like you were. I mean, are you kidding me? You didn't invent Eleanor, Rosie, or Sam. So what are you even going on about? Eleanor makes her stand. Flee every danger. Okay, so Eleanor makes a stand. So it wouldn't have been taken from your story if she didn't. It makes no sense. The Galadriel, Scourge of the Orcs. Galadriel impaled the King of Orcs. Wait, what? The King of Orcs? Not just the King of the Orcs? So there's a king of all orcs now. Jesus. I guess all humans also have one king then. This is getting more and more ridiculous. Yeah, Galadriel can't kill any orcs now, because this masterpiece of a writer made her kill one orc in his fanfiction. What a original idea. We are all in awe of your talent. The Aryan. I made apprentice. I've been accepted into the Builders Guild. So apparently someone in the fanfiction says a woman should be accepted into apprenticeship. That's the entire context we get. I assume it's not a Builders Guild, so this one seems a little far-fetched. Though it allows me to talk about the guilds of Numenor for a moment. We know from the lore that there were at least a guild of weaponsmiths, and the famous guild of venturers, founded by Eldarion. So it does make sense for a Builders Guild, or like, to exist on Numenor. Given the text we have about the women of Numenor, it wouldn't have been into architecture and building, however. But I guess there are exceptions, so I think it's a fair thing to include in the Rings of Power. I got no idea what the context in the fanfiction is, but it's a fairly common trope that a woman enters a male-dominated profession, so it's not really an original idea in any way. In fact, it's a bit cliché at this point. If it had been specifically a Builders Guild, I guess it would have been slightly more valid, but it's just very far-fetched here. Galadriel loves human king. Your people have no king, for you are him. Jesus Christ, yeah, it sounds like the Rings of Power at least. Galadriel and Eldarion began having an affair. That's it, I'm going now. My goodness. Ah, yes. The very idea of Galadriel having an affair with Eldarion is beyond ridiculous. I guess the only connection here is that both of you forgot Celeborn. Man, this is pure heresy. I can barely handle it at this point. But let's move on. Ugh. It is here, Father. The moment we feared. The elf has arrived. Galadriel dragging Numenorians back into war. Okay then. Let's just pretend that's a valid point at least. Jesus. Eleanor befriends a wizard. So Eleanor befriends Alatar in the book, just like Eleanor aka Nori befriend the wizard in the Rings of Power. I guess that could be a valid point, but then again, is it though? I mean, it makes no sense that Eleanor is called Eleanor in the Rings of Power, as it's an Elvish word for flower, meaning sunstar. Sam named his daughter after that flower, after he saw it in Lothlorien. It's a bit predictable they'd pick the name though, just like it was for you, Polychron. The difference is that the Rings of Power at least created a new character, while you just stole the character from Tolkien's works and claimed it as your own. And befriending a wizard? Really? Not a unique idea. Well, I guess this is still one of the better points. Elf ships on our shore. Again, no context, so far-fetched in my opinion. Elven hands will never take Numenor. Remain a kingdom of men. Numenor was for men alone. I don't even know what to say about this one. Yes, Numenor were for men, more specifically the Edain, that helped during the War of Wrath, along with a handful of Druidine. I don't recall a single line indicating that the Nunorians feared that the elves would take the island. So it was a stupid idea in the show and in your book. Congratulations, you both violated the law. And I suppose that Elendil here is a great runic emperor. God, I hated that line in the show. Apparently there's an emperor in Polychron's story, so now none of us can ever use the word emperor again. I guess there's no reason for me playing any more Crusader Kings then. Not all of Numenor. Rival factions were forming. I assume in the book it's a reference to the rise of the Kingsmen and how some were still part of the faithful. But again, it's not from your book, it's from the actual lore. I am no god, at least not yet. God, what a cheesy and cliché line. There's no doubt it's from the Rings of Power. So Adar is just an elf that turned into an orc and then comes with this cheesy line, while this Ulbandi character in the fanfiction seems to be either a Valar or Maya. So I'm feeling you're comparing tomatoes to tomatoes, but I can say no more than that. Adar is still Prince of Orc Elven, father of a nation. Why am I doing this to myself? So he claims they stole the character Estel from his book and just changed the name to Adar. Now, Estel is apparently half orc and half elf. Yes, it doesn't make any sense. From what I've heard, an orc raped Celebrian and she gave birth to this weird creature named Estel for some reason. This is violating the law in so many ways, but I will refrain from talking for hours about this. Anyway, the connection between the two is extremely far-fetched. They are not even the same sort of being. Elf pulls out arrow, man heals with the elfin seeds. Yeah, it's still called Elverin. Again, we're given little context, which just seems to highlight the loose connection. When I was a child, I heard stories of elves taken by Morgoth. Again, they're not stealing the stuff from your book, mate, but using bits of lore for some of their original characters. In this case, it's inspired by some lines in the Silmarillion, and not your book. I vow to eradicate every last one of you. Galadriel. Ah yes, the bloodthirsty maniac Galadriel. Alright, fair point. This seems like a valid thing they actually stole. They both changed Galadriel completely, to the point where it's no longer Galadriel. Congratulations, you both violated the law yet again. Galadriel in love with the King of Numenor. This one's dumb, but here we go. So in the fanfiction, Galadriel falls in love with Eldarion, while in the show, Halbrand, aka Sauron, seems to fall in love with Galadriel. Say it with me, friends. Congratulations, you both violated the law yet again. This just seems to repeat the previous point about Galadriel having an affair with Eldarion. Magically induced mountain flood. It took me a few moments to figure this one out. It refers to the river in Mordor that activates Mount Doom. But at least Demetrious didn't include that part in his book. I guess some things can be too stupid, even for him. Again, very far-fetched. Gandalf. LOTR. At least Demetrious concludes the wizard in the show is Gandalf. I'm sure they will mystery box him yet again in season 2, and then he will be a blue wizard instead. Or maybe they will just go full retard and let him be Gandalf. Anyway, in the show, the wizard heals a tree by saying LOTR, while in the fanfiction, there's apparently a type of tree called LOTR. I guess the sad part about that is that LOTR means flower in Quenya. Despite all that, it seems like a more plausible connection, though more likely a coincidence, that both of them took that one word from the actual lore. Durin, you were a mighty dwarfish for an elf. What? I don't even know what he means here. 3 evil women hunting a wizard. Wow, 3 witches, huh? You know, in my review, I made a joke how the 3 witches from Macbeth had seen better days, and then Payne and McKay came out a few weeks later and admitted they took the idea 3 witches from Macbeth. How original. So they've already come out and admitted they stole the idea of 3 witches, but sadly they took it from an actual pro and not a fanfiction writer called Demetrious Polychron. And the last one. Queen Regent with a blindfold pulled over her eyes. Okay, someone gets blindfolded. What a connection. It reminds me of something. What is it? Oh, yes. The Fellowship were blindfolded for a short while. Oh, and when Frodo was blindfolded by Faramir. But I guess Tolkien stole that very unique idea from you. I feel sorry for you, but not for the right reasons. Conclusion. So what's my final verdict for all this? I think Demetrious Polychron is the uncrowned emperor of stupidity on the internet. One thing is suing someone for copyright infringement when you're the one actually doing it, then there's suing the company that helps you sell your awful fanfiction. And I could go on. But to misspell Tolkien's name in your Tolkien fanfiction, God, that is next level. Not to mention all the misspellings and the lawsuit. So congratulations, Demetrious. You managed to be equally horrible as the show. You are now officially in the unpopular club. So to conclude, no, I don't think Amazon stole his ideas, but dear Demetrious, I do think you stole a lot from the law and claimed it as your own. I guess the life lesson from all this is that you're probably not going to be a great writer if you can't spell and steal all your ideas. But what is actually worse? Misspelling everything, stealing all your ideas, or claiming stuff from the law as your own? I'll let you guys decide. All I can say is, no way on earth this guy wins. I think he should consider himself lucky if he is not the one getting sued and have to repay $250 million. Never have I heard of such absurdity. Special thanks to all the patrons and members of the channel. You make all this possible, so thank you. Now, if you are interested in a more faithful adaptation of the Second Age, you might be interested in my own Second Age series. Feel free to check it out. As always, thank you all for watching and being part of the Council of the Rings. Farewell till next time.